Tonight, in a 15-round international contest, world heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali defends his title against George Chuvalo of Toronto, the Canadian heavyweight champion. This 15-round championship contest is coming to you direct from Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Greetings, everybody. No matter where you're watching, greetings from Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. We have a tremendous crowd, estimated at up to 14,000 people on hand for the heavyweight championship fight between Muhammad Ali and the Canadian champion, George Chuvalo. And with this huge crowd in attendance, there's a feeling of excitement and anticipation as both fighters are now in the ring. They have just put their gloves on, and we're just about 2 minutes away from the bell for round one.
Toronto, VK on the beat, check. I'm in Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm from Toronto, where you wanna get the city love. I'm in Toronto, like we wanna get the city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1035 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. StickerU.com. Create custom stickers, labels, tattoos, and decals for your home and your business. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. Ridley Funeral Home, pillars of the community since 1921. And Canna Cabana, the lowest prices on cannabis, guaranteed. Over 100 stores across the country. Learn more at cannacabana.com. Joining me this week to celebrate his father, George, is Mitch Chuvalo. Mitch, welcome to Toronto Mic'd.
Hi, Mike. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I met your father at a John Gallagher book launch at the Cadillac Lounge, and this was a few years back. And when he shook my hand, I honestly thought he was going to break it. It was quite something.
Well, like all heavyweights, you must have a bit of a fist to be successful. Yeah, it's like the head of a hammer, right?
It's like a mitt. I mean, it was incredible. But the big question I want to ask you off the top before we're going to celebrate your dad here, and we're going to talk. We're going to get into some weeds too, and it's going to get real here. But I want to ask you, how is your father doing these days?
Well, I thank you for asking. And I know when people ask me this question, they ask it with beautiful intentions, hoping to hear something positive and heartwarming. But brain damage and dementia and Alzheimer's and CTE, whatever categorization of cognitive decline you want to say my father's decline is, it's not good, right? So he cannot. He's bedridden, Mike.
Okay.
He's been bedridden for a couple of years. He cannot speak very well at all. Most of the times he would be described as like semi-comatose, staring off into space. It's an ugly and unfortunate ending to a life that's had peaks and valleys. But when people ask me that, and I thank you for asking me that, I wish I could say something better. What I can say though,
yes,
is that he's safe and comfortable, right? So he had COVID a couple of years ago, but survived that. So that was a fantastic thing, and that's a testament to his internal strength. He's still got that, but unfortunately his brain is dying, and the body will hang in there, but the brain has its own timing and agenda, and when it stops sending positive signals to the body, then and only then will it be all over. So you know, death is never an easy thing, but we're, you know, almost at the stage where, gee, what kind of quality of life does he have? And I ask those questions all the time of myself.
Right.
And I certainly know when it's my turn to go, I'd rather, you know, have my cognitive capacities and being able to communicate, you know, with people I love and care about. And he can't even do that anymore. So it's kind of tragic and kind of sad.
I'm so sorry to hear this, and I suspected as much. Even when I met him at that Cadillac Lounge of John Gallagher, I actually had a feeling. I'm just going to be completely honest, and I hope you'll be completely honest for this whole conversation. Yeah. But I actually had a moment where I felt like, John was kind of a friend, still is kind of a friend, and he was a client because I was producing his podcast with Peter Gross, Gallagher and Gross Save the World. But I had a moment of like, I'm not so sure. Like maybe I wasn't so sure your dad should be out and about like that, being kind of carted around to meet people. He didn't quite seem aware of where he was and what was happening.
Well, I think what the your underlying position, anyone's underlying position on that is, what is, when someone goes into cognitive decline,
right.
Are they then to be, shunted away to a quiet little room where, but we know, and the doctors told me this, any kind of stimulation he can get, and people meeting him and people expressing their love and concern for him, I have nothing but good things to say about the last couple of years when he was still relatively fluid cognitively.
Good point.
And I have no regrets or second thoughts in getting him to meet people, because I think my father is regarded as a treasure, a Toronto treasure, a West End Toronto treasure, a Canadian sports icon for numerous reasons. Post-boxing career, so many people wanted to connect with him too. So I know that was good for him, that stimulus to the brain where he would try to remember an old friend, or someone would come up with a story that sparked a memory. I can only say positive things about that. There are some people who believe that there's some kind of shame in that, and you should hide people and right. Put them in a place where they can have quote unquote dignity in air quotes. I don't believe in that. I think the more open discussions we have about what happens to older people when they go into cognitive decline, and certainly fighters and how to protect fighters and what we can do with regard to boxing becoming safer, all those kinds of issues were stimulated when people saw George in his various stages of decline. So I have certainly no second thoughts, or I'm not apprehensive about what I did at all. I think it was good for him.
No, good points.
Yeah.
No, absolutely great points. And you're right. It's that dignity. Like but there he was, enjoying a meal at the Cadillac Lounge, meeting people who loved to meet him. Like I know myself, it was like, hey, Gallagher, get out of the way. That's George Chuvalo.
Well, Johnny's not very quiet when he comes into a room either, Mike.
By the way, he's got a hell of a handshake. I will say this, and I've shaken, and I always ask John to wash it first. I just want to say, but
good luck with that.
Yeah, and then I take a shot of penicillin, and then I get ready. But John, he's got a mitt. Like I will say, maybe he learned this, from your dad, but he's got that one of those handshakes which is designed to crush bones.
Yeah, really. Yeah,
so anyway,
I'm not sure if John had an amateur background in boxing. He might have, or he might tell you that he has.
Yeah, he might have.
I mean, it's just when people are in that macho environment, they have a tendency to overindulge and try to demonstrate, that they belong there, right? So I've seen that many times in the past. So good on Johnny.
Well, that's why I never felt comfortable in those circles. I just simply couldn't break bones with the handshake. But listen, the best thing about COVID was the fact we stopped shaking hands. Like,
yes.
Did you
little fist bump?
Fist bump. I like the fist bump. Okay, Mitch, did you ever fight? Like, was there ever a point in your life where you thought you should follow in your dad's footsteps?
No. And I'll speculate as to why I never became a boxer, because no one really knows why people do things, what their ultimate motivation is. They'll tell you what their ultimate motivation is, but there's probably so many things that they're not even conscious of.
Right.
I was around boxing all my life, and I don't look at it with rose-colored glasses whatsoever. So very early on, I realized that it was a sport of extreme exploitation. It was also the sport of the underclass. So most fighters come from a lower middle class to very poor, in terms of the socioeconomics, very poor backgrounds, and it was one of its supposedly redeeming features is that it was a great way to climb the socioeconomic ladder when you didn't have much else.
Right.
But what you ended up seeing were poor kids who didn't have anything to fall back on, who rose to a little bit of fame, and then were left destitute because of being exploited by managers, trainers, promoters, having a feeling for fighting too long, not having any kind of life skills to fall back on once boxing ended. And there was that element. I didn't come from that background. I came from, a pretty, at different times in our family life, we were middle-class kids, aspired to be upper middle-class kids, whether that was an actuality and whether my family ever attained that or not, I'm still debating in my mind. But regardless, I never needed to be a fighter, Mike. And I think that's the key point. If you want to be a good fighter, it's not that you want it, it's that you need it. And I never needed that, right? So I was a pretty good student. I always wanted to, I played football at university, so I always had that intention of furthering my education, which was so good for me. And on top of that, and this brings us back to George,
right?
I never knew a fighter, once I got to be, to my early teens, I never knew a fighter who had a career of any length or reputation that did not suffer major cognitive damage. And I mean everyone.
Right.
I don't mean most. I don't mean, only the one. Every single one suffered cognitive damage. Getting hit in the head, regardless of how well trained you are, destroys brain cells and leaves you cognitively compromised. And I was but I played football too, right? So, and I played in the Southern United States for a little while too. So, people didn't know about it back then. And brain injury, traumatic brain injury, TBI, in sport was not even spoken about back then. It was kind of, even when they were talking about fighters, they would kind of laugh it off.
Yeah, like shake out the cobwebs, just shake it off.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's right. That's right. Hey, even when I was playing high school football, I remember guys going out and getting dinged, and the trainer, who was usually the teacher, would put a little smelling salts or ammonia under the nose, and they go in 2 plays later. Now, you would never do that now, right? No. You would never do that now. But I think instinctually, I realized how harmful it could be on the human experience, especially your cognitive, health, your thinking patterns. I saw guys mumbling, shaking, and he's punchy, But I always thought it was way more tragic than comic. It was always treated as comedy, but in the end, it was very tragic. And these people ended up destitute. So my dad, to his credit, never encouraged any of us to be fighters, right? So even though my brother Georgie, who was a good amateur fighter, I saw the pressures. I was a little older than him, and I saw the pressures that he went through. Guys in the crowd yelling, "Kill Chuvalo!" It was like he couldn't escape that. Like he couldn't just be himself, even within the ring. He had a reputation to live up to, and I think that hurt him a lot.
Well, his name was literally George Chuvalo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So and even at a young age, like I saw my brother who was an amateur, and he didn't know who he was fighting. He'd show up to fight someone. The guy would be like 2.5 years older than him. Right. Now, when you're 7 years old, that's a big difference, right? Right. So, no, I did. To make a long story very short, or attempt to, no, I never wanted to be a fighter. Now, I played hockey. Yeah. And back in the groovy 70s,
Broad Street Bullies.
Yeah, I mean, it was as violent an environment you would ever want to be in.
Hey, I saw a slap shot. Okay, Mitch.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I, I fought often back then. I was a good aggressive hockey player. I was actually going to be, there was talk of me being drafted into the OHL. Back then there were no scholarships for hockey. I wanted to pursue my education. So I stopped and I started focusing on football. But hockey was a terribly violent game back then, and I had my share of fights. And I did okay. George would show me a few tricks. Always throw the uppercut. Hockey players always throw over the top. You come up under the knee.
Right, the haymakers or whatever. Yeah.
The one hand at a time. No, just shoot the uppercut. They don't expect that angle, right?
Wow.
So my dad did teach me a few things with regard to fighting that I don't usually brag about, but I'll do a little bit of it here.
Well, before we explore some of your father's prowess as a heavyweight, greatest heavyweight this country's ever produced, in my humble opinion, but I'll get your input on that in a minute. But share with us all listening, all the FOTMs listening right now, like, what is your vocation? What did you end up doing with your life professionally?
Well, I became an educator. I'm still at present, hopefully soon to retire, a teacher. I teach at the University of Toronto Schools, which is a private school run by affiliated with the University of Toronto. I've taught there for about 20 years, but I've taught another almost 15 years prior to that at public schools in Ontario. So I've taught at 5 different schools.
Okay.
I started out as an English teacher, but I've taught, the gamut. I've taught history, English, as I just mentioned, special ed. I had classes with kids with reading problems. I now teach health and phys ed. So,
well, good for you. That's such an important. My mom did the same. Being a teacher, that's wonderful. So good on you for that. I think that's
thank you.
Great. Now your dad, So I'll give a little bit of the bio here, but 5-time Canadian heavyweight champ, 2-time world heavyweight title challenger. But when I look back, and again, I missed your dad's career. I'm a bit too young. So I learn all this from, I have people on the show and we talk about legends of the game, and I talk to Hebsy once a week. And so I know the legend of George Chuvalo. But it's the 2 fights, I would say, from what I've gathered, it's the 2 fights against Muhammad Ali that are sort of the sort of made the legend of your father, because your dad was never knocked down. He had 93 professional fights in his career. And Muhammad Ali a couple of times, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, like some major heavyweights. Right. None of them were able to knock your dad down.
Right. So, my dad always had mixed feelings about the never being knocked down part of his career, because that's what people had a tendency to focus on. Right. And when people talk about my father's career, that's almost always what they allude to first, right? He was tough, granted, and that creates kind of a mental picture of my father being a caveman-like slugger who took 3 or 4 punches to get one. And I think for the casualist fan, that's about as far as they're going to go. But my father's career was much more than that. He has one of the highest knockout ratios of any fighter in the heavyweight division. He had, I think, 64 knockouts out of 93 fights. Yes, the fights with Muhammad Ali are for the casual fan, kind of the benchmarks or what they have a tendency to reference George by. But my father beat a lot of great fighters. He lost to some fighters he should not have lost to. I think a lot of that has to do with his being really poorly managed and trained early on in his career. And he had to take some time off and buy out his contract. And then he got hooked up with Teddy McWhorter and Irving Ungerman. And my father's career, really, I would say from, let's say, 1960, late 64, early 65 till around 1970. There were about 5 or 6 years where he was, regarded as one of the best heavyweights in the world. So, the 5-time Canadian champion thing, it really was, it's kind of a strange thing, because he lost 2 fights to Robert Clerou in Montreal, where it was very, very difficult for, an Anglo fighter to get a decision. That was the time of the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, and Quebecois nationalism was, very strong at those times. So beating George, I think one of one of the things I like to talk about with the Claroux fights, and not to take anything away from Robert Claroux, he was a very, very tough individual, kind of a wild, brawling type, and he fought George very aggressively. But of the three fights, the Canadian press had George winning all three. But when you're fighting in Quebec and you're fighting a Quebecois hero, it's going to be tough to win the decision. And my dad never badmouthed fighting in Montreal, even though he got when he figured the short end of the stick a couple of times, because he loved that fan sentiment where you're behind the guy at all. Like, he loved that. And, people loved George early on in his career in Toronto. And certainly he was a fan favorite at Maple Leaf Gardens, but never the rabid kind of love for him that a guy like Claroux got for socio-political reasons, right? So my dad was an immigrant, a son of immigrant people from Bosnia-Herzegovina. Most people in Toronto didn't even know where Bosnia-Herzegovina was. And so it's a little, the ID factor wasn't as strong. But so he lost to Claroux a couple of times. Then the Canadian Boxing Federation would not have anybody for him to fight, so they'd strip him of the title and say it's my dad's fault. Well, it's not my father's fault to be the promoter and make sure that, people want to fight him, because nobody wanted to fight him. And they took it, but he won it back. Anyway, he finished off his career, 3 knockouts of guys who challenged for the title. Trevor Berbick was mentioned, as Trevor was just starting out then. And my dad had a contract to fight him for $25,000 each in Toronto, and the Boxing Federation, which was centered in Halifax in Trevor Berbick's hometown, said, no, come fight here for $10,000. My dad said, are you nuts? I'm not going to, fight for less than half I can make here. So he packed it in, wished Trevor good luck, and retired from boxing. So yeah, the 5-time thing is, people go, why was it 5 times? Well, the 2 losses to Claroux, and then the Canadian Boxing Federation not being on top of their game and trying to play bully boy with them. That was never a good deal, because my father always had a difficult relationship with the Canadian Boxing Federation, because he thought that they were just, some appointees who knew very little about fighting. And they were a federation in name only. Like, when my dad should have had a crack at the British Empire title, which is, I think, called the Commonwealth title now, but it was the British Empire title back then. They never pursued the British Boxing Board to give my dad a shot at any of those guys. Odell, Bugner, Henry Cooper, none of them. They just wouldn't do it. It was an ineffectual organization. So for them to then, after the facts, start going around ordering my dad that he has to fight this guy for that much money, my dad said, are you out of your mind? So, it's not like boxing. Scheduling a boxing fight is, you have to have a promoter, and you have to have interest, and money has to be put up. It's not like a hockey game where it's scheduled every Saturday night, right? These things they don't happen overnight.
Do you think, and I mean, your bias aside, and it's clear this is your father we're talking about, but do you think your dad is the greatest fighter this country has ever produced?
I think my father's the most resilient fighter this country has ever produced. My father did not have the opportunities. Well, anybody fighting in Canada really is going to be shortchanged a little bit, because aside from Montreal, and there were times when Halifax was a thriving boxing city, but for the most part, you don't get the great trainers, you don't get the great sparring, and there are times where when Irving Ungerman and Teddy McWhorter got involved with my dad in 64 and 65, that changed a little bit for my dad. But still, you're basically, it's kind of like trying to be a hockey player in Brazil. It's, there's not a huge history of it. People are crazy about another sport. In Brazil, it would be soccer. And, yes, you can achieve some notoriety, but you don't have all the cards in your favor. So it's problematic in that regard. As far as the greatest fighter, I'm a boxing fan, and I know a little bit about I was a boxing fan. I'm less so now. But is my dad the greatest? I don't know. I mean, that's a very subjective offering either way, like if you think he was or wasn't. But there have been great fighters. Look, how can you take anything away from Lennox Lewis? I mean, Lennox was such a great fighter, so courageous, the two guys that knocked him out, he came back and beat them. You know, he totally whipped Mike Tyson.
Right.
I think Lennox is, you know, not only in the conversation, it's very debatable as to who's better than Lennox, and being a world champ, of course. But my dad did fight, and I always tell this to people. If you want to know what kind of a fighter my father was, my father won. He lost against Floyd Patterson in 1965. And that fight was the Ring magazine, the Bible of Boxing, that was chosen as the fight of the year. So people can say whatever they want about my father, but I will answer, my father fought the fight of the year in 1965 in the whole world of boxing. And that's, you know, exclusive territory for only a few people who've ever put on the gloves. So, wow. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Whether how he's regarded in terms of being the greatest, or you know, what his shortcomings were, that's for other people to debate. I enjoy watching my fights, my dad's fights. Pardon me, my fights. That's kind of
that's how close you are.
I had to fight for him. Your dad's not so good, and I had to go fight for him.
Right.
But you know, I don't think it matters. All I think is that people respected what he did. And you know, in terms of his being a tough guy, the ultimate tough guy and resilient person, you know, he's in that conversation. That's good enough for me.
Okay, now, so you're right. It's very subjective, and is he the greatest and all that? And there's another guy who gets in that conversation that your dad worked with. I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But back to the word respect. You just dropped respect. Do you think your dad has received the respect he deserves for what he accomplished in the ring? Like, did he get his flowers, if you will?
Well, I think that people have viewed now, Mike, with YouTube, where people can go back and watch, you know, fights from the past that are posted. I think people have can have a more discerning eye as to my father's capabilities or shortcomings. So I know that whenever I went elsewhere in the world, outside of Toronto or Canada, to the United States, or even I remember being in 1974 or 75, I can't remember what year it was. I was only a young guy. I was 14, 15 years old. San Juan, Puerto Rico, to watch Clyde Gray fight Angel Espada for the welterweight championship of the world. And 15,000 people. My dad was down there with CBC to do the commentating on the fight.
Sure.
And he took and in lieu of getting paid, he took my brother and myself, and a rabid crowd of, you know, crazy. Puerto Rico is a crazy boxing environment. It's unbelievable. There's such a rabid pro-nationalist, pro-Puerto Rican crowd. It's unbelievable. Anyway, before the fight started, my dad was announced as being there, and the ovation they gave him was, my brother and I were taken aback. We're just, you know, that was the first time I realized that my dad was deeply respected outside of Toronto, where, you know, the boxing press doesn't even exist here. So you'll get people who cover hockey, curling, horse racing, whatever, right. And then now they're writing about boxing like they know something. Right. And, you know, they always demonstrated to me, for the most part, what they didn't know about fighting as opposed to what they knew about fighting. So yeah, respect. I always, yes. And then I go to places like the International Boxing Hall of Fame, or the World Boxing Hall of Fame, or the National Boxing Hall of Fame, places in California and New York State. And my dad would always have lineups galore, people, you know, glowingly, you know, right, singing his praises. So I think in the end he did, but there was a period of time just post-career where I think people took shots at him, because I think what we mentioned earlier, you know, fighters, you know, they have as difficult a time as any athlete when they retire, because they have nothing to fall back on. A lot of them are around unsavory characters throughout their boxing career, and they tend to socialize with those people after, and, you know, people get desperate and do stupid things, and then with cognitive and physical decline, they get involved with all kinds of stupid things like drugs and alcohol, crime. Anyway, my dad did not have a great 10 or 15 years after he retired. And then he got into promoting fights and training fighters, and he was doing well with that. But then he was always arguing with the boxing commissions here in Toronto, who didn't know very much, and tried a couple of times to make him a scapegoat for their failings. So yeah, I would say yes overall now, but there were times where it was tough for George to be, a retired fighter. It was tough, but now in the end, and then of course what transpired with my family in terms of addiction issues, and my father's willingness to go out and speak very openly about those things, I think endeared him to a lot of people. And I know, some of us in the family had trouble with that, that he was kind of being exploitive and opportunist in that regard. And regardless of my feelings, I have to put those on the back burner and recognize that he helped a lot of people, right? He helped a lot of people who looked up to him as, that piece of Canadian rock that we're all kind of cut from, right? So, Canadians in general are tough, strong people. And if they could identify with my father and his challenges and it helped them, then, that's a fantastic thing.
Has your father been named to the Order of Canada?
He has.
Good.
Yes.
Good. I was, because that to me is a slam dunk, to be frank. So what year, do you remember, or approximately what year? Oh, it's okay.
Oh my!
It's okay.
Early 2000s, I would imagine.
Early 2000s. Okay, I know he was inducted into the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame in 1995.
My father's Ontario Sports Hall of Fame, Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, the World Boxing Hall of Fame in Los Angeles, the National Boxing Hall of Fame in California. He's got some. What do they call it downtown? The Walk of Fame, the Star.
Yes, right.
So he's been
lauded,
recognized multiple times.
Okay,
right?
Good. Now, just to go back to the two fights against Muhammad Ali. So the first one, which was March 29th, 1966 at Maple Leaf Gardens. After that fight, famously, Ali said about your dad, quote, "He's the toughest fighter I ever fought." Like, what do you know, like talking to your dad and being so close to your father? Like, what can you tell me about his relationship with Muhammad Ali?
Well, let's put that comment by Muhammad into context.
Sure.
Muhammad, went to have so many tough fights after George, right? In fact, too many, to the point where it hurt him, right? So, but that quote has to be contextualized. So at that time, he said George was the toughest man he ever fought. Now, Muhammad went on to have tough fights with a lot of other people. Joe Frazier, of course, sure. George Foreman, Kenny Norton gave him tremendous trouble for 3 fights. Ernie Shavers. He had so many tough fights later on. Like I said, too many. So, yeah, that fight with George took it on 17 days notice. He was a fill-in for Ernie Terrell because the people in Montreal, the fight fell through because when Mayor Drapeau got word that Americans were going to boycott Expo 67, which was a huge cultural phenomenon, promoting Montreal and Quebec and Canada. It was kind of like a World's Fair, that it would be boycotted if they would allow the fight to happen in Montreal. Montreal pulled out of the fight, and they looked for George to fill in on 17 days notice. So I remember those times rather vividly. I was only a 6-year-old boy, but I remember those days leading up to the fight, the press involved, people in town. My dad changed his routine a little bit. He was working with a guy called Lloyd Percival, one of the leading sports scientists, and a Canadian and a Torontonian at that, for those 17 days. And he always mentioned that Lloyd was instrumental in helping him get his anaerobic capacity up. And I saw my dad doing all kinds of high intensity, after his regular training, doing a lot of high intensity circuit training. I think often now as a phys ed teacher, that's kind of the genesis of my being interested. Why this as opposed to that, in terms of a form of training and how it benefited him. And it got him ready for the fight. Yeah, it was a lot of it's black and white in my mind, Mike, with cameras, lights going off, flashing.
Sure.
But yeah, I remember the fight. I remember going into the fight with my mom holding my hand, crossing Carlton Street, and how beautiful she looked. I remember the old Maple Leaf Gardens, the blue and white, the paint, the layers of paint on the wall, going through the turnstiles at about not much lower than head height for me,
Right.
pushing through, the smell, everything. Like it's an overwhelming sensory experience. The crowd, the roar, the light, the heat, the smell of stale popcorn and ice in the gardens, because they put down boards over the ice. Yeah, I remember it all, of course. And I remember standing up on my seat telling the referee to get out of the way so my dad could hit him.
Well, your dad was not knocked down, of course, as we discussed. And
and George meted out a lot of punishment to Muhammad. That people say it was like a one-sided affair. No, George hit him with some great shots, to the point where Muhammad had to go to St. Mike's Hospital after to get checked. Right. He was urinating blood, and his kidneys were in rough shape. A funny story. Many years later, in the late 80s, my dad and I were invited to Hartford, Connecticut, where Rocky Marciano Foundation, a charity, would put on a fundraising dinner, and they had all kinds of people there. And Muhammad was there, and Muhammad he couldn't speak very well at the time. He said, "Mitch, the first time after I fought your father, I couldn't sit down for a week." He goes, "I was peeing blood for 2 weeks, and the worst part, no coochie with the wife for a month."
Your dad did that.
My dad, yeah.
Never forgot.
My dad. That's what Muhammad. But the interesting thing about Muhammad, I had an opportunity to meet him a couple of times. Always, when he was in cognitive decline. So he was always very carnal. He always had some kind of, joke about women and things like, yeah, he was a great activist. Yeah, he was, at the center of so many things that were so important and world changing, but he was also like a guy's guy who liked to tell jokes and loved being around, young people and laughing. And yeah, he's a wonderful guy.
You mentioned moments ago about, your family's, personal tragedy. And Mitch, I'm wondering if you're comfortable if we go there at this point and just to speak a little about what, your dad's been through, what you've been through in terms of family tragedy. Are you okay with that?
Michael, I'm an open book.
Open book. Okay.
Listen, I'm a health and phys ed teacher.
Right.
So, I used to be a gym teacher. Then I became a physical and health education teacher. Now they've switched it to the biggest lens you can ever put on your health. I'm a health and physical education teacher. So anything that I can speak to that can help somebody or scare them off doing certain things, I'm happy to do.
So Mitch, I have been reading about what's happened with your family, and the more I read, it's so incredibly heartbreaking and sad, and I can only imagine what it's like for you. So again, thank you for being so open and honest about all this. But let's talk about this. One is, okay, so your mother, Lynn, you mentioned, looking so beautiful in Carlton there. So she gave birth to 4 boys by the time she's 20 years old. Mm-hmm. One of them being you.
Yeah, I was the first one. I was born like 4 days after she turned 16.
That in itself is quite something. Only because I
think George would have been arrested. Times were different back in the 50s.
Right. Well, you said it. I didn't. Okay. So
I can say, thankfully, we look at the relationships differently now, right? So.
Right. So, I guess she would. 4 days after her 16th birthday, she gives birth to you, Mitch, and then she gives birth to. By the time she's 20, she's given birth to 4 boys. Now, let's start. Let's talk about Jesse just briefly here. So again, and I'll try to keep it together while I talk about this, but
no, we're good.
Mid 80s, 1985, he's only 20 years old, and your father discovers his body what happened to Jesse?
Well, Jesse was a heroin addict. He My father tells the story of Jesse tearing up his knee on a motorbike, and then after the operation being put on opioids, and then after, like, we're talking 1984, 85, 1984 actually, when the accident happened, and being taken off opioids and going for street drugs after. And while that is true, there are other factors. I think my brother Jesse was he was a troubled kid in terms of his interaction with the law. He was a very, very aggressive. If there was anyone in the family who should have been a fighter, it should have been Jesse, because he could punch like a mule kick, and often resorted to that when people would bother him about he was electrocuted while my dad was training to fight Ernie Terrell. My brother, while with my mother at a friend's house, crawled underneath a table and bit on a live cord, an open-ended cord that wasn't properly and electric. It almost killed him, and he required bouts of plastic surgery to make his mouth functional. But there was always that obviously distinctive look to his lip structure, and people were very cruel. People could be cruel, they call him. If I don't even want to say on air what people would say to him. And anyway, my brother, after a while would have enough, and then he'd just react violently. And I always tell this to people, and people don't believe him. My brother was 11 years old. He knocked cold, unconscious 18-year-olds who were mouthing. Can you imagine the fast twitch muscle fiber and explosive capability of an 11-year-old knocking out 18-year-olds? So he was well known to the police because of his aggressive nature. And I will publicly say that the police did not treat him well. I mean, he came home at times with like cigars burned in his forehead. Of course, you can't go. Now it's a different world. The cops don't have that kind of power, right? So, but he built up a lot of resentment inside himself, and he was a casual drug user before he went to heroin. So, we're talking about soft drugs, smoking marijuana and hashish, that nature, right? But and my parents were broken. They'd separated at the time because my father was having a hard time paying the bills in transition after boxing, and my mom, who was working at Northwestern Hospital, felt she wasn't getting the support from George when it came to the boys. Ostensibly Jesse and his older brother Georgie, the second, he's third in line, second youngest brother. Right. And my mother left the home, and when that happened, things went downhill in terms of the family structure, right? So just after my parents actually went to dinner together to discuss things, and when they came home, my brother Georgie and my dad discovered my brother on the floor of a bedroom. With each put a shotgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger, and
oh my God,
killed himself. He killed himself. So
look,
that was I was living in Guelph at the time. I'd finished university, but I was working at a pub and trying to pay off some student debt, and working at a YMCA with creating youth strength and conditioning programs. And I just remember driving back. Well, I kind of remember driving back from Guelph when I got the news, and just how I made that trip back without crashing the car, I'll never know. But that opened up a Pandora's box for other people in my family to take their own life when the pain became way too overwhelming. And suicide is a totally still misunderstood phenomenon. I understand the pain that takes people there. What they don't realize is the pain that is left for others to deal with afterwards is 100 times the pain of what that individual is going through. But of course, when you're in so much pain, you don't, you're solely focused on reducing that pain, right? You're not worried about what happens after
Also,
the
I
fact.
believe when you're in that mindset, you believe the world is better off without you. Like it's as if you're doing a favor to your family by exiting.
I think, Mike, that's a great point with reference to my brother Jesse, because I know he felt very bad about being a heroin addict. He felt shame. Um, I didn't know this. I found out about this afterwards. He tried to hang himself a couple months before. George didn't tell anybody about that. Um, that was problematic because if I'd known about that, if other people had known about that, we would have made sure that Jesse went to get some serious psychological help. But again, we're talking about 1984, 1985, Mike. Teen mental health, or well, my brother was 20 years old at the time, but teen mental. No one even discussed that.
Right.
People didn't even talk about that issue. And if it was recognized as being a reality in your life, you kept it in the closet. You did not.
There was a
talk about
stigma.
it.
Yeah, right. There was an
Yes.
absolute stigma attached to it, where when it came to mental health, like it was a weakness. Oh, you can't cut it. You can't cut it, and therefore you buried it under the carpet, and you swept it under the
So
rug.
imagine a guy who's reputed to be the toughest man in the country,
Right.
the son of that child,
Right.
admitting to like a mental health issue. It was an impossibility back then. The vocabulary did not even exist for that to be a possibility.
Mitch, again, and sadly, I'm going to say this a few more times, but I'm
No,
sorry.
no,
I'm
no,
sorry
no,
you had to
I'm
deal
good.
with this. Now, listen, if the only tragedy that happened to the Chuvalo family was in 1985, 20-year-old Jesse taking a gun and committing suicide, if that was the only tragedy to afflict the family, it would be just horrifically sad. But I'm not done. Where do Georgie Lee? I know he I guess when you're George Chuvalo Jr., you go by Lee maybe. What name did your brother prefer to be known
Well,
as?
he had numerous he
Okay.
had numerous names, and I think your point is well taken, that he was very uncomfortable with being George Chuvalo Jr. So yeah, he called himself Lee Chuvalo. He also called himself Lee Shepherd. Shepherd was my mother's maiden name. Yeah.
Right.
Brother G. He did not I don't think he was ever fully psychologically comfortable with being George Chuvalo Jr. And I don't blame him for that. He also had problems with the law, and he was one thing I know about George. He was a bad alcoholic. Well, I don't know if there's ever a good alcoholic, but I don't mean that in terms of a person's morality or character. I just mean that alcoholism is by its very nature bad. It's a terrible addiction that still is problematic for a lot of people. And he was a bad alcoholic, but his personality would change, right? So I don't think he was ever comfortable in his own skin. And after coming out of jail in 93, he wanted to die. He would publicly express that he wanted to die. He came out of jail, he got a hold of a whole bunch of heroin. And even though it's listed as a heroin overdose, he died at the Gladstone Hotel on Queen Street. He purposefully overdosed and killed himself. So that was devastating, absolutely devastating. For my parents to have one child die and then to have another one die,
right?
It was overwhelming. And for people who don't know the story, 4 days later, my mom took her own life. And as mad as I was, and am sometimes still to this day, because my mother used to say to me, Mike, remember one thing, son, good times and bad times, neither one lasts. So there's always an oscillation between those two, extremes of the human experience. She obviously for a minute forgot about her own advice, and she swallowed a whole bunch of pills that she'd had stored. She found them. My brothers had stored some opioids from I don't know, a huge cache of them, and they stored them in the house. My mother came upon them and had them hidden just in case something horrific happened again, and something did, unfortunately, and she took them.
Wow.
She drank a bottle of whiskey, and she took them, and she wrote a note that says, "I look for love. There's none anymore in the world." And she took her and she swallowed them and went to lie down in the room where my brother Jesse had died, and she passed away there.
So fucking sorry. Like, okay, so this is your
no,
second brother. Just again, your second brother, essentially, even though it might be listed in the as a overdose of on heroin, it's really a suicide, essentially.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so Jesse kills himself in 1985. Georgie Lee kills himself in 1993, and then 2 days after the funeral for Georgie Lee, your mom, your beloved mom, Lynn, takes these, prepares the suicide note and takes a lethal dose of prescription pills that, as you point out, was stolen by Georgie Lee and your other brother, Stephen, who we're going to get to in a minute, who had stolen it, I guess, in like a drugstore heist or whatever.
Yeah. My brothers were went to jail several times for drugstore heists because they get desperate, right? They get going on that inward journey that took them
It's
away.
Addiction, right? It's
it's horrible. And my mother was an alcoholic too, and she had consumed a large bottle of whiskey before she took the pills too. So I can't leave that out of the equation too. I wonder if she. Listen, people experience pain in different ways. I don't blame anyone,
right?
But just my overall recommendation is we avoid those kinds of traumas that make us do those extreme things, right? So that's the hard part, right? And everyone reacts differently to different things. These are not easy problems to solve, right? They're difficult problems to solve.
And your mom, Lynn Chuvalo, was only 50 years old when she. And your dad, George, he discovers her body, I suppose. Lynn's body.
I believe that to be true. Yes.
Okay, and this is 1993, and then this, as sad and horrific as this story is, we're not done yet, unfortunately, because a few years later, 1996, your brother, your other brother. Of the four boys, you are the only surviving boy. And we should point out your sister Vanessa is a survivor, much like you. But Stephen, is this an overdose on heroin, an accidental overdose, or is this also Stephen taking his own life at the age of 35?
Mike, you ask a great question. He had just gotten out of jail too. Being incarcerated, how the mind works, and he'd split up with his wife, so I think he was on an emotional downer too because of that. He went and got a rather lethal dose. Not long out of jail, he went and got. Of course, when you're off heroin for a while, you don't build up that tolerance, right? So if you go and you get a large dose of it, a very potent heroin, it took his life. Now. He had expressed in letters to people that he was very down beforehand, but understandably, he'd been incarcerated for a while. He didn't have the opportunity to take care of his family. He felt very guilty about that. He was splitting up with his wife, who had basically taken on the role of being the sole parent, and she's a wonderful woman who survived a lot. My sister-in-law Jackie. I think he was certainly depressed, and I think he knew of the possibilities, right? I don't think he was, ignorant of the fact that if, he took a pretty potent pretty potent dose of heroin, there might be the opportunity that he might not make it. And he died. He was staying with my sister Vanessa around Davenport Road and Avenue Road in an apartment, and she came home from work. The doors were locked. She couldn't get in. And my poor sister found him with a needle in his arm and a cigarette burning. So, yeah, that was tough. I was in Los Angeles with my wife at the time, and I just gotten down there, and I was meeting my in-laws for the first time, and we had a beautiful street party that night in West Hollywood, is a small little Latin community. I remember they have the Christmas lights hanging and the smell of beautiful Latin American food, and everybody was happy and dancing. And then I got that message, and I just did that, with a 180 again, which which happens to people when they hear traumatic news. And I'll always remember that too. My beautiful brother, Steve, whom I was very close with when we were young. And yeah, I felt terrible about that too. But, and then you start to think, that your life's a little bit cursed, Mike,
Well, I want to ask you, like, at this point, and I don't even know how to phrase this, but is it possible there's almost like muscle memory? Like you're kind of, you've experienced this trauma before. Like you've now at this point, this is, again, I know you're very close to Steven. So again, I'm so sorry, but so you've lost 3 brothers and a mother in, a relatively short 11 years, I guess it's a total span. But like, does your body at all, is there any like calluses that form almost, I want to say like some kind of almost numbness after experiencing that kind of trauma 4 times at 11 years? And well, I'm not a psychiatrist, so
no. Listen, I'm not the first person to say this, but the first cut is the deepest, right? So
yeah, sure.
I think after my brother Jesse died, I was in psychological shock for some period of time after that, and I took care of my health the way I needed to do that. And that's to throw myself into exercise. Like exercise was a place where my mind could be free, right? Focusing on, and then I took a year off to travel the world, right? I went to India and look, was I seeking enlightenment? No. Was I seeking meaning in life? Yeah. Did I find it? I don't know. But I had those opportunities to take that inward journey myself and try and figure out, what had transpired. And that time after Jesse died, really laid out a framework for me by which, whenever I was challenged psychologically, I knew that I had a game plan and a place to go to that'd get me through it. Was it easy? No. But did I know what worked best for me? I would say that after 4 times I did, right? So exercise, speaking very openly about these issues like I do to you and I do to young people, key and critical. Having great supports in your life, whatever it is, some creative element to your life where you can still find beauty in the world. All those things are very important to people when they've suffered some kind of trauma, psychological trauma, right? So how do you get back into finding meaning and value in the world? You have to discover what works for you. And I tell this to young people all the time. Life is not always going to be rosy. When it gets difficult, you have to know how to take care of yourself, right? You have to be really self-aware. You have to have that, what I call the metacognitive piece in play. Like think about your thinking, right? Think about how you're thinking, right? And be able to step back and pause and take a look at things. So I had opportunity to build those structures into my life. And I promote them all the time with other people, right? Find out how you take care of you best. And when something like that happens, don't be looking for a plan then. It's too late. You're in panic mode. Know beforehand, what do I need to do to make myself feel good, both physically and psychologically, right? So what are my support systems?
Well, before I press record, you and I were bonding over our mutual love of cycling.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
In this home, and I have not experienced anything to the degree that you have, but in this home, we literally refer to my daily bike ride as my medicine. Like is, go ahead. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, that's beautiful. I love to hear that as Alpha as that teacher. Exercise is medicine. It's the best prescription. You know where your mind goes when you can free float, right? And not attached to anything, or you can focus in like a laser beam and you'll get your most creative thinking, right? All while you're doing what your body's supposed to be doing, is being active, right? So, and not only that, whatever you want to call it, that feeling of the beauty of pleasure, hormonal response, self-esteem, right. I don't care what it is, after you're finished and done and showered and, and you're more alert, every cell in your body is turned on and you feel alive and you feel it's a beautiful way to reaffirm how beautiful it feels to be alive every day. No, I'm with you 100% there.
So hearing you, talk, it's like, okay, so some people might hit the bottle, other people might hit the needle, if you will, needle and the damage done. Shout out to Neil Young.
Yeah, right on.
And then there's others who would channel it in the way you have, which would help explain why you're a survivor. Okay, so by the way, coincidentally, I suppose, the most recent guest on this program who sat here in the studio with me is a young man named Derek Christoph, who has been rapping under the handle Decisive for many years. And he was prescribed opiates for an injury, and very, very quickly, just unbelievably quickly, became addicted. And he was open and honest about this just on, I think it was Friday. Was it Friday or Thursday? I think it was Friday. He was open and honest about this, and just hearing his tale about how his opiate addiction led to behaviors from him that were not in his character at all. Like, he abandoned his child, his wife, and just so this whole like idea of a prescription drug, like a Percocet or something, of ending in a heroin addiction, which is something your dad has said about Jesse, for example, and far more common than you would ever realize.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, one of the, when I was with my dad the last few years, people would come up and tell their story. They would tell or the story of a loved one, and what you realize is that we're still a hurting nation, right? We have people, the wonderful thing, if there is a wonderful takeaway from my family's story, is that because it's so open, people felt a need and a passion to share and share their story and let them know that our family's story has been inspirational to them. So that conversion of a negative to a positive, not everyone gets that, right? So yeah, addiction is still, the major health problem in this country. I'm convinced of it, because, it's a physical health problem, but it's born of probably mental health issues that don't get addressed, and it leads to more mental health issues. So, the things that cause addiction most probably start, to my way of thinking, when people are young. So, some kind of trauma causes people to be addicts. There are doctors out there who talk about this. This is not a new insight by me. This is spoken to directly by people who are much better versed in the topic than I am. But taking care of our young people so that they're not traumatized and don't have to turn to drugs and alcohol as an escape. Let's take care of each other. Let's take better care of each other. And I know that when my dad got up to speak to people, he was very open, and he could be at times very shock oriented in the things he said about what happened to my family. I know that people knew that he was coming from a good place, and he didn't want them to experience the same things that we as a family experienced. And that was, and people, I can feel that, and I could see the way people would come up and speak so intimately and beautifully, and the things they would say. I mean, after my mother and Georgie had died, I go back to the house, and there'd be like 30, 40 letters in the mailbox, and each one was a heart-wrenching story from all over Canada, North America, and other places in the world, like Sweden. I remember a couple of letters from Sweden, and people would tell about what happened to them, and that there is still light at the end of the tunnel, wishing us all the best. And that was straight, pure from the heart. That was an adrenaline shot of love, right? So so many people are hurting out there, and so many people have a great story to tell, and that's why they connected with George, right?
Now, I was going to ask you about your father. I mentioned you were a survivor. Vanessa's a survivor, and George. Yeah,
my sister. I just want to mention
please.
My sister and what a strong individual she is. It wasn't easy growing up a woman in the Chuvalo household. It was not, but she's a strong woman, and she's raising her kids. She does such a great job. She's a fantastic mother and a beautiful person, and she's got stories to tell too. From a woman's perspective, believe me.
So how much? Okay, she's the youngest of the five. Right. How much young? I know I mentioned 4 boys by the time your mom is.
I'm the oldest,
20.
and she's the youngest. We're the bookends, right?
So what's the gap there? In
8-year
years.
difference.
8-year
8 years.
difference. Okay, so there's a little break between number 4 and number 5. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking of your
my
poor
mom.
mother.
My mom always said she wanted a daughter. Come hell or high water.
When she got one. Okay,
She got
good.
one.
And I'm glad I was going to ask you what your relationship was like with Vanessa, of course. But thank you for sharing that. And then about your dad, real quick here. So your dad, again, you kind of told us what happened after Jesse passed away. But then with Georgie Lee, his beloved wife Lynn, and then a few years later Stephen, how does your father survive this trauma in his his intimate little family?
Well, the time after my dad remarried relatively shortly after my mother died, right? So I was not happy with that. But who am I to say how people survive these things? I've got my modalities and the way I deal with things, and then of course he had his too. So I'd be lying if I was to say our relationship was good for maybe 5 or 6 years after my mom died. I was newly married and I went on to do my own thing, but I think my father getting up and I think he was a friggin' laser beam when it came to talking. People did not talk about addiction, right? And when he got up, this tough guy, this macho man,
the toughest guy this country could produce. Like, yeah, you'll listen.
And he got up there, and at times he would break down and he would cry, and people in the crowd would be. So I think that affective modality, that emotional appeal, when he can do that, when he could be so open about it, I think he got great feedback and love, and people loved him for it. But I know, he'd call me up years later and he said, I just want you to know, son, that, sometimes I feel like shit having to talk about what happened to our family. I make a living at it. And it's I feel, I own the exact language, but he felt like he was taking liberties, and that he was being he didn't want it to be seen like he was he was being opportunistic, but he was always worried about the fact as to whether or not people would see he's going to speaking to people and being paid for it, because he had to make a living.
Sure, of course.
If that was being a little too, what's the word? We'll just say opportunistic. We'll just leave it at that. And he would call me at 2 a.m. Sometimes we'd have conversations that, that was the gist of the conversation. I won't tell you the particulars, but sure, we'd go to some pretty deep places, right? So, but that's what all fathers and sons should do. They should have those opportunities to go to deep places, right? So.
Okay, Mitch, you told me you're an open book, so I have to tell you that a past guest of this program is the wonderful Mary Ormsby, who wrote for many, many years at the Toronto Star. She actually dropped by with her husband, Paul Hunter, who also wrote at the Toronto Star for many, many years. They're a lovely couple, actually. But Mary Ormsby had covered a story for the Toronto Star before she was retired by Torstar. That's another story for another day, but the story, so this is, again, I'm only speaking about things I literally read about in the Toronto Star here, but you mentioned briefly that your father got remarried shortly after your mother took her own life in 1993, and your dad's second wife is Joanne, and maybe I'll use your words instead of reading what Mary wrote for the Toronto Star, but there's some, very serious accusations, and there's a legal matter at play here between you and Vanessa, I suppose, the two surviving children of George, and
the powers of attorney for George.
The powers of attorney, and also, yes, right, in legal words as well. So you maybe let's turn it over to you, because I have read these Toronto Star articles, as many people listening have. But what's happening there between Joanne Chuvalo and you and Vanessa? And where is it at right now in front of the courts?
It's a never-ending saga. George had decided he wanted to get divorced. And why did George want to get divorced? Well, he hadn't lived at his house for 2 years. My father did very well on a land deal, and he made a fair amount of money. But at the same time, I think his cognitive health was deteriorating. Anyway, he sells the land, and he all his life. It's kind of like, have you ever seen Death of a Salesman? Salesman's
Loman, yeah, yes.
Salesman's got to have a dream boy. And my father bought a piece of land a long, long time ago, back in the 80s, and held onto it, and then sold it for another piece. And anyway, he was out at Hamilton Airport, and he made a substantial amount of money off of it. Okay. So he and his wife bought some properties, but I started to notice George going in, like having memory issues, just like the common markers of, a healthy mind.
Cognitive impairment, we might call that.
Cognitive impairment, right? So I said, Dad, go get your brain checked. He goes, he would always make a joke about it. And my father, being an articulate man and operating a lot from rote memory, if someone asked him about the Ali fight, he was spot on. And if he was questioned about what he had for breakfast, he couldn't remember. So what are you doing about it? He would avoid it, right? Like he would just, bury his head in the sand. So he told me that his relationship with that woman was going downhill. And I started to know he wasn't staying at that house anymore. He was staying at another house he had in Rexdale with his mother-in-law and his brother, who was a lifelong criminal and had just been out of jail. So he was living there. And I asked him why he was out of there. He goes, well, I'm divorcing her, and we don't get along anymore. And but I said, but why are you here in the first place? He said, I was kicked out because I had bed bugs. And that was over 2 years ago. So he tried to go back into his house, and he was arrested. Back to the house up in Caledon, and he was arrested.
And this would be, maybe we call this the matrimonial home. Is that the home we're talking about? Okay.
Yeah, the matrimonial, and he was arrested. And I couldn't, why would my father be arrested? Trying to get back into his home that he had been kicked out of for 2 years. And then there was a restraining order put against him. Well, that's when I decided, and he'd initiated then divorce proceedings. He says, Mitch, I need your help. I said, how do you want me to help, Dad? He says, I want you to be my power of attorney, you and Vanessa. So we became powers of attorney. Well, once his wife figured out that we were powers of attorney and I could have access to funds, because I knew my father was going to have to go into a home. I could see it. He was declining rapidly, right? He couldn't bathe and take care of himself properly. His personal hygiene went down. He would have moments where he was so he wouldn't know what city he was in. And not only that, his capacity to even walk was being it was shutting down. So I knew that there was going to be an issue with that. So he started divorce proceedings, but I also knew that he needed funds because he was going to go into he was destitute. He had no money. Can you believe my father, who made over $3 million in a land deal and who was getting paid up to $5,000 to speak to people, had no money in his account, and he came to me for money? I said, something's not right here. Something is amiss here. So my sister and I became powers of attorney. We got a hold of some of his investments that were paying dividends. We made sure that my father had monies to survive on. That's when the other party got involved, freaked out, and got a lawyer. She had 3 sets of lawyers. The first 2 didn't work out for her, so she got another set of lawyers. And they started challenging my power of attorney. They also challenged, very intelligently, the divorce proceedings. See, my dad had stood up in court and said, I want a divorce, but they kept stretching it out, knowing all along that my father was in cognitive decline and that eventually he wouldn't be able to have the capacity to make any kind of a judgment, right? So very intelligent on their part. They stretched it out, and then at the end, my father he didn't know time or date. He was so vulnerable, right? So that's where that went. But we did get access to his monies, and I made sure that I got him into a good home where he was cared for, and the dividend from an investment and the sale of one of his houses supports him being in the home he's in right now. So most recently, she tried to sue me and 4 or 5 other people, the lawyers involved and my dad's friends, for something akin to like psychological trauma, but that got thrown out of court for $2.5 million. She tried to sue me for that. I have this sense that she just thinks that it's an endless money grab with my dad because her last name is Chuvalo. It's not. My dad will be taken care of properly, and no matter what she tries to do, I'm going to tell her and anybody else involved right now, I'm doing what's best for my father. I'm taking care of him because other people had abandoned him, right? And as much as my father and I have had difficulties over the years, I wasn't going to abandon him. And I wasn't going to see a life that had both triumph and tragedy in it, and tragically, so I made sure that he was safe and comfortable. And if I go down for that, you know what? I'm okay with that. If taking care of my dad is a bad thing and making sure that he was well taken care of after his needs were ignored, then I'm good with that.
That's a hill you're willing to die on.
I'm willing to climb that hill multiple times with people on my back.
Now, you mentioned off the very top of this program, just to reiterate, though, your father, although his cognitive abilities have declined, and on that note, real quick, because I have I was the power of attorney for my grandmother, and she, there was a point where I would go visit her in the long-term care facility, and she had no idea who I was. Like, we would so the last several years of her life, she died at 98, but the last several years of her life, she had no idea I was her, her first grandson. Is that where we're at with George and you? Like, will George know that you're Mitch?
George now, like I'll walk into the room, his eyes won't even shift. He's staring at the wall. And if I get into, like, I'm leaning into the camera now, if you can see me, if I get that close, hey, George, how you doing? Well, I might speak to him in a little bit of Croatian because that was his first language. Not that my Croatian is very good at all,
right?
But that kind of stimulates the memory bank. The deepest memories, the early memories are the ones that go last. Apparently.
Well, have you tried the music, like playing the songs he loved?
We play music. My nephew Jesse is wonderful. He brings over music and plays them a whole bunch of songs, and he seems every once in a while to recognize a lyric, but even that light is starting to fade. Right.
No, I know. I've been there with my grandmother, and it's almost like you bury them twice. Like, it's like, she's gone, but her heart will beat for several more years, and then you will, bury her again. It's a long, slow goodbye, right? Long, slow, but I mean, I guess the point I wanted to reiterate is that he is comfortable and safe as we speak right now.
Right, he is. Thank goodness.
No, that is most important here. Okay, and again, thankfully, I'm not involved with the situation with Joanne, your stepmother. I know that term is a funny term, but the woman who married.
Not my stepmother. We are ostensibly the same age. That's a veritable impossibility. She's not my stepmom.
Right. Well, the woman who married your father and
my dad's second wife. Yeah.
Yes, right, exactly. But you're looking out for your dad, and he's safe and as comfortable as can be. How old is your dad right now?
He's 84, Mike.
84. Okay. It's strong body, strong physical health.
Absolutely.
It's the mind just went before the body, which happens all too often here. Yeah. Okay, so let's leave it a lighter note here, and then obviously if there's anything I missed you wanted to talk about before we say goodbye, but this has been a wonderful conversation about your father and your family. But in the West End Phoenix, there was an article I read about your dad and you. I know this neck of the woods. I know the Junction quite well. I used to live at Jane and Dundas for a while, and my boy played at George Bell Arena, and I know the Junction quite well. But tell me about the Pegasus.
Well, the Pegasus was a bar. It's no longer operational. That I used to take my dad on Friday nights, and he used to, music being, as you mentioned earlier, being a great way to stir memories. He would listen to a few songs, and I'd get him up, and he could sing, Elvis tunes, Jerry Lee Lewis tunes, whatever the tune was. His memory would come alive again, right? Those memories would come alive. And, seeing that he was born at St. Joseph's Hospital, grew up on Hook Avenue, just north of Dundas, east of Keele, I grew up later on just near Old Western Road in Davenport. That was something akin to a full circle move, like bringing him back, and then people would come into the Pegasus. Tony Seguras was the owner of the bar. I taught his younger sister Sandy, who went on to be a world boxing champion.
Hey,
by the way.
nice.
Yeah, so not because of anything I did or trained.
Well, you never know.
But there's a boxing connection there, I guess. Anyway,
yeah.
They made things very comfortable for George there. People who grew up in that neighborhood who'd heard, maybe even some of them had never met him before, but had heard stories about him, would come up and relay that, my uncle says he saw you when you were 19 at the corner of Pacific and Dundas, something like that. And there's that opportunity again to stir memories, right? So I found that to be a very enabling experience for him. It kept him more solvent cognitively than, if he had been just sitting in front of a TV somewhere. People loved it. And the guy who wrote the story, Joe O'Connor, did a fantastic job of kind of displaying the mood and sentiment that happened there. And it was a lovely way for my dad to kind of say goodbye to the neighborhood before he had to be put into a home. So I was happy for that experience.
Before we leave the junction here, so you're probably wondering what an FOTM is, because I dropped it. It means friend of Toronto Mike. So Mitch, you are now an FOTM. So
thank you, Mike.
You can have that forever. And a fellow FOTM, great friend of the program, is a gentleman named Joel Goldberg.
Mm-hmm, yeah, sure. I
had lots of dealings with George. I remember we were talking about different things, even Great Lakes Brewery, a sponsor of the program, but many dealings back in 2018, 2019. I guess he was involved in the opening of the George Chuvalo Community Center.
All right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So I just wanted to shout out.
It's not a community center, Mike. Maybe
okay, what is it? Yeah, please clarify.
It's called a neighborhood center.
Okay.
So your standard community center would have fitness area, gym, all kinds of. It's more a neighborhood center. It's a drop-in spot for the elderly or kids looking for a place to do homework, or LGBTQ plus place, that's safe haven for them. Yeah, it's a wonderful little spot next to the rail path.
Yeah.
My dad grew up not far from there. He actually went to school at St. Rita's up the street, where my grandmother, who worked at Symington and DuPont, used to come during her breaks and throw a pomegranate over the fence, or while she was plucking chickens at Royce DuPont Poultry Packers.
Right. No, I know this again. I know his name as well, but there's a scene in the Hurricanes. Speaking of Toronto and boxing, okay,
right,
where the car crash in the Hurricane is that bridge where I guess Dundas and Keele, and then it becomes Annette. Actually, it's Annette. Annette becomes DuPont at Keele, I want to say. Right. Anyway, that bridge there is a kind of in the movie, because of course there's a whole bunch of Toronto stuff in that movie, but where the Hurricane. But I digress. I just thought I'd bring up a little boxing connection to that neck of the woods you're talking about. But amazing. So shout out to FOTM Joel Goldberg, who, by the way,
was a great guy.
Yeah, he co-founded Electric Circus, and just the other day I spoke with Ken Pompey, who's Dalton and Tristan Pompey's father, but he was the cowboy dancer on Electric Circus. So we actually talked about Joel just earlier in the week. So a lot of Joel content here.
Good stuff.
I'm trying to make. All right.
Wonderful.
Last couple of fun facts is one is that we all, at least if you're my age or older, you probably remember seeing the remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. So I just want to share the fun fact that your dad was in The Fly.
Yeah. My dad's been in numerous movies, always playing some kind of, the tough guy part. Yeah. He's got a typecast that way.
Right.
What I remember the scene, of course, where he gets his arm ripped apart, but I also remember him talking to me when he was actually getting the arm, like the process to go through that, to make the actual artificial arm and all the detailing that went through it. It was quite a complicated process that he spoke of. He had his eyes opened up as to how much work it actually takes to make a modern film, and all the people behind the scenes who are doing all that. I remember my late niece Rachel Chuvalo, she was a beautiful kid. She died at 30 of esophageal cancer. And
Oh.
I remember I have this memory of her actually seeing the movie and seeing her grandpa's arm get torn and her having that kind of visceral response to it, right? So
It was quite the scene. Like
yeah.
even before I knew that was George Chuvalo, you remembered that scene. Yeah. If people look for the arm wrestling match with Jeff Goldblum's character and a guy named Marky. That's your
Jeff Goldblum's eating a chocolate bar, and George makes fun of that. He's eating chocolate, and then gets his arm ripped up.
Is that the biggest movie your dad appeared in? Maybe.
No.
What is the biggest?
It's the biggest movie my dad acted in. Maybe
that's what I mean. Yes.
But he was. People might not know this. He was in the first Rocky movie, and he was also in Pulp Fiction. There are pictures of my father in both those movies, like two of the most violent movies of the 20th century.
Oh, because Bruce Willis's character was the boxer,
right?
Who kills the guy in the ring.
When he goes back, Mike, when he goes back to the room to get this watch his dad brought back to him from Vietnam.
This watch.
He goes back. Yeah, I remember that that was a great scene with Chris Walken.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes back to and Travolta's waiting to kill him there. He's in the toilet. Right. As you walk into the apartment with Bruce Willis, there's a big poster of my dad up on the wall. George Chuvalo, Canadian heavyweight champion.
I don't know how I missed that. That's my favorite movie of all time. I've seen it 100 times, including at the Cinesphere on the biggest screen, the IMAX screen.
Watch it again. When he goes back in, you'll see. Yeah, Canadian. And then in Rocky 1, the first Rocky,
which I love,
when Rocky's walking Adrian around, he's walking and she's skating. Remember, he buys time from the Zamboni driver on their first date.
Yes.
And then he pulls out a picture. Hey, this is me, a picture fighting so-and-so back. It's actually my father fighting the Italian champion, Dante Canè. Wow. And he's hitting him with a body shot, and Canè's feet are coming right off the ground. Wow.
Now these are fun facts, because this isn't even on I couldn't find this in any bio or any wiki page or anything. Like, this is a true fun fact that I had no idea about. That's amazing.
Yeah. George is immersed into the culture of violence.
All right.
You know what I love, just as an aside, Mike?
Yeah, please.
I love discovering, and people send these to me all the time. Just street art murals of my dad. There are so many, in the GTA. I find that amazing. Street murals where pictures of my dad are on garages or on a wall in the rail path, wherever it is, or my dad's name somewhere, on a bridge, like high above an intersection. Yeah, I love that kind of stuff.
Amazing. And the last fun fact I have before I turn it over to you is that, we talked about great Canadian fighters, and one that I remember quite well, because again, I'm a bit young to remember your dad's career, but I followed every minute pretty much of Razor Ruddock's career. And your dad, from what I understand, was training and working with Razor at the beginning of his career, especially the big fight where he beats Mike Weaver.
Yeah, where he got his first big win, right? Yeah. So my dad trained him. My dad said he was a phenomenal athlete. And he was instrumental in training Razor to get his first big win over Mike Weaver. Yes, that's true.
Former.
And then they had a parting of the ways, because egos get involved and people know better, and a couple people see their names in the paper once or twice and their head swells to epic proportions, and what do you do? But my dad always said he was a phenomenal natural athlete.
We had those two big tilts against Tyson that were must-see TV for me and my buddies, and Razor didn't win him, but he
fought. He pitched, man. He was courageous. If you take a look at the Mike Weaver fight, you'll notice my dad had him way more athletic, sticking and moving, and throwing combinations and staying on the outside and using his length. And then that takes great conditioning to be able to maintain that for long periods of time. And then he got with other people who slowed him down and turned him into a one punch guy, that mule kick punch, which was effective. But certainly I think he was a better conditioned athlete when he was training under my father's.
I'll bet. So Mitch, I gotta say, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so appreciative you gave me all this time, but I don't want you to leave if there's anything you wanted to share or bring up that you didn't get the opportunity to do so. Now, before I play a great song from a Toronto band called Lowest of the Low to play us out here, please, the microphone is open. Is there anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, can I don't want to end on a negative note. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Mike. It's been beautiful. And I welcome and I'm thankful for the opportunity. I just know that you had Spider Jones on a couple of weeks ago, and Spider always tells everybody that he had this deep, intimate relationship with Muhammad Ali, and that he sparred with Ali. And I just want to go on record in response to that. That's totally bogus. That's an out and out lie. I'm not going to go into great detail here because we don't have the time for that. But anyone who wants to reach out to me and get the particulars as to why that is totally, I'll call it bull roar, a prevarication of the highest order, I'll let them know. But and what disappoints me about Spider is, he was a friend of my dad's. My dad gave him a great break in the media by getting him onto his show, Famous Knockouts.
Right. And
he's been abusive of that friendship by creating falsehoods, and I'm not very pleased about it. Right. So I don't want to go into too much detail here, but if anybody wants to reach out to me, he always threatens to sue me. Come and sue me, but he doesn't really. He wants to. He's got a paralegal in a strip mall in Pickering to send me some kind of threatening letter. Hire a lawyer, Spider. I'm a big boy. Come after me. But then you'll have to prove everything you've said, and I've got it all on record, my good man.
Now, Mitch, I'm just again. I don't. I feel the same way about Spider as I do about you, which is that I had a great conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking you to take sides.
So here I am. I will say, and no, how could I ever pick a side? Except I listened back because you gave me a heads up on this, and perhaps, in fact, it seems like in the past maybe Spider embellished or perhaps put a little more.
Embellished is a kind word. But
okay, so I would say, for the purposes of this conversation, I would say I would solely judge Spider Jones on what he said to me in our 90 minutes together, which is only a couple weeks ago. We did about 90 minutes together, and I listened back, and I know you listened as well. So in his conversation with me, he really does play it down. Like, he didn't say he was part of the entourage or he was like this.
Yeah. Michael?
Yes, I know.
I know he did that, but the only reason he's doing that
is because he knows you're listening.
He knows I'm listening.
Right.
He said things like he released all these, he created all these belief echoes, like he drops names and like that's supposed to somehow support his position. But he said things like, you asked him if he was a 3 times Golden Gloves champion. And he says, everything was Golden Gloves back then.
Right.
Well, that's, he's trying to obfuscate it, confuse, that. And then he said, you were a sparring partner. Yeah, but I wasn't really a sparring partner. Right. I wasn't part of his tribe. Listen, at 19, he wasn't even in Toronto at that time. 1966, he was 19 years old. Why would Muhammad Ali spar with, the greatest fighter in the world, come and spar with a 19-year-old? Impossibility. That's so much. He's also said before that it was written up in the papers, and I've asked him for proof of that. He can't prove that. I have him actually saying that. So listen, right. Spider is the king of the embellishment. We'll call it that. All I ask is, that's a sacred memory for me, my dad's fight with Muhammad Ali, and its place in Canadian sports history. And no matter, you're not riding on the coattails of that one, my good friend.
So Mitch, my friend, I think when, and it was only maybe yesterday that I did a tweet to say, my next guest on Toronto Mike is Mitch Chuvalo. And once you tweet, the world is aware. So I was hearing from lots of people who had memories of your dad and excited to hear this, and pointing me to different things. And I got a phone call last night from, Spider Jones. So, I'm sorry, you can only say it in one way when I can't say it.
Spider.
Yeah. So I got a phone call from Spider yesterday, and he was rather concerned that you would.
Of course he is.
Right.
Of course he is. He makes a living of telling people that he's done this, right? He's got a foundation. He has a foundation where he goes around, believed to achieve. And he said to me, you're preventing me like helping young people. And my response to that will always be, young people, regardless of who they are always deserving of the truth.
Is any of this, and I know how freaking honest you are, so I know you're going to tell me the truth here, but is any of this Spider versus Mitch. I won't know what else to call it, but is any of it because Spider is on Joanne's side with regards to some of these lawsuits that we talked about, between you and your sister and the current wife of your father? Like, he may have sided with Joanne, thinking that George was better off with Joanne, and then you were, as power of attorney, trying to get the divorce.
Spider would know nothing of the situation. The only time you'd ever see Spider would be where he had an opportunity to self-promote, right? Right. Which that's you never saw Spider anywhere else unless he was at a function where he was self-promoting.
Then we'll leave it with this again. Here I am, peacekeeper. That's Mitch. I'm the peacekeeper.
No, I hear you.
Let's leave it with this. Regardless of whether there was any embellishment or or never,
outright lies,
right? You don't want to never let the facts get in the way of a good story. You know that. But outside of that, can we concur here now, before I play the extra music, that Spider Jones isn't trying to hurt anybody? Like, Spider is trying to help people in the world. I feel like, and again, I don't know him as well as others, but it feels to me like at the core, Spider is a good guy trying to do good things for people. Am I? What do you say to that?
Well, how best to put this? There is no act that anyone performs in the world that is not an act of self-interest, perhaps. And I think he's just taken it a little too far. Now, if Muhammad was around, it's amazing. My dad's in cognitive decline, and Muhammad's dead, and Angelo Dundee is dead. But I'll tell you who's not dead. Khalila Ali is not dead, Muhammad's wife at that time. And the people, Amherstburg, Ontario, is a little community outside of Windsor. And they have something called the Amherstburg Freedom Museum that talks about Black culture in Canada and the Underground Railroad. They once had Spider as a member of that museum, but people down there referenced, what the bogus lies that he'd been promoting, and he was taken out of it. So he might be doing good things or trying to do good things. That's wonderful. But again, prevarication and lying and try to build a reputation on my father. There's only one person who fought Muhammad Ali, and that was my dad. I take that back. There's a guy called Trey Travis who got up for a couple rounds and sparred also at Sully's gym. Spider was not even in Toronto at that time. So I have a certain kind of idealistic view of my dad and that experience and the way it shaped everything that transpired in my dad in our family. And I cannot let it go without commenting on it. I don't feel good about it, because I did consider at one time Spider to be, if not a good friend, at least friends of the family.
Absolutely.
And this creates an uncomfortable scenario for all involved.
Well, the nice thing about my conversation with Spider is that I recorded every second of it, and anyone right now who wants to go back and hear exactly what did Spider Jones say to Toronto Mike about Muhammad Ali, it's all there. I didn't edit a stitch, and because I am still, again, on the final words here, is that I feel like he did tone down his involvement in that camp and in that experience. Maybe because he knew you were listening, but regardless, I think he is trying to clean that up, and I do think Spider is trying to help people in this world and do good, and I have a soft spot for Spider, but Mitch, I also have a soft spot for you.
Thank you.
And again, your dad is a Canadian hero and a survivor and a fighter, and thank you for sharing those stories about your dad with us today.
Mike, wonderful to talk to you. I appreciate the opportunity.
And that brings us to the end of our 1035th show. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Toronto Mike. Mitch, if somebody wanted to follow you anywhere, is there anywhere they could go?
No.
Well, that's because you're a teacher, right? It's probably better.
Yeah, I gotta be careful what I do.
Oh, right? I know teachers. They're like, no, it's not worth the hassle. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter.
Mike, I'll be retired soon, and then I'll open up all those avenues.
Well, hit me up, man. Maybe you got to get your own podcast when you retire.
That'd be nice.
Our friends.
And I'll have you on first guest.
Oh, I'd love it. Our friends at Great Lakes Brewery, they're at Great Lakes Beer. Palma Pasta is at Palma Pasta. Sticker U is at Sticker U. Ridley Funeral Home, they're at Ridley FH. And Canna Cabana, they're at Canna Cabana _. See you all next week.